Welcome back to Why We Like This, the show that treats Florida like the active crime scene that it is. I am your host, David Quinones. I'm joined by your co-host. He's got me on his WhatsApp block list for some reason. It's Tomas Kennedy. What's up, Tomas?
The long-running thread of my battle with technology, listener, every other message that David sends me on WhatsApp says waiting for a message to be delivered, and it is never delivered.
And it's never worth it either.
Yeah.
It's stupid stuff that I'm sending.
Yeah, we've been trying to figure this out for what, like 4 days now, and I don't know.
No, it's whatever. It's a complicated thing. We won't bother you with it, dear listener. Just know that we're working on the tubes that comprise the internet, tirelessly. Today, we're going to talk about two stories burning up the headlines here in Florida and beyond. The first is the spate of unlawful detentions and due process free deportations and the ensuing constitutional crisis that it portends. And after that, we're going to return to the one scandal that the DeSantis family just might not be able to handle: the evolving and expanding miasma of apparent political graft and backroom dealing surrounding $10 million of Medicaid funds that somehow were earmarked for Hope Florida and points beyond. But first, joining us to discuss and analyze these stories a bit more, you know him from his hit Substack newsletter, Seeking Rents, where he covers corporate influence in Florida. And if not, you know him from his numerous appearances here on this very podcast. Please join me in welcoming back intrepid reporter Jason Garcia. Hey, Jason.
Hey, how you doing? Folks are far more likely to know me from here than from the newsletter.
That's just not true.
That's not true. Is there anybody, by the way, is there anybody else that gets to be intrepid, or is it just reporters? I realize that's one of those like adjectives that's like only used with reporters. Like you can only be an intrepid reporter. I don't know what other intrepid people
So funny you said that, because I literally thought the same thing as you said it.
Everyone go subscribe to Seeking Rents. Jason, I saw that today you posted a podcast giving a 50-day check-in on Florida's legislative session. What else do you have going on over on the Substack? Quick opportunity for you to plug Seeking Rents.
Yeah, it's mostly just session related stuff. So we're writing a lot of stories about like who's behind tax breaks and bills moving through the legislature right now. We've been doing a lot on the DeSantis Hope Florida scandal too. So bunch of stuff. It's session is kind of like Christmas if all the presents were horrible.
So we're going to talk more about the Hope Florida scandal. And honestly, if you want more context and you want to sit down and read it, I can't think of a better place than to go to @Jason_Garcia, where he has a whole thread kind of recapitulating a lot of what's been going on since the last time we recorded. So check that out. But in the meantime, really quick, guys, before we jump into the immigration check-in, an economy check-in, small note as we record this Wednesday evening, we get to those topics. But before we do, gentlemen, I can finally confirm for you that the markets are imaginary. Everything is a meme coin. Nothing is pegged to reality. Tesla, last I checked, was up 10% at the end of the day, closing after announcing a 71% decline in profit yesterday on their earnings call. They also disclosed operational statements that show that the car maker's remaining profit margin is composed entirely of government subsidies. And if one were to doge away those subsidies and Tesla's lucrative government contracts, what remained would be a deeply unprofitable car company with a toxic brand hemorrhaging cash. By the way, yesterday, Elon extended the pushback for full self-driving longer than I've been a father, and I have been a father for 10 years. So his pushback of saying full self-driving is coming just at the end of next year is now officially longer than my tenure as a dad. The earnings call also featured a promise from Musk that he was going to limit his Doge work to a couple days a week going forward. We'll see how that goes. And in the meantime, we've got more pump and dumps from the Trump coin. You guys remember Trump coin, right? Just today, it was announced that if you are one of the 200 or so biggest holders of Trump coin, Tomas, I think that's you. It was announced today that you will have a chance to register for a dinner with the big man himself. Fellas,
Already registered.
Do you care to guess what happened? Do any of you care to guess what happened to the value of the previously cratered Trump coin value after that announcement?
I made some money, baby.
Yeah, it went up 49% almost immediately. Priming the pump for, I don't know what comes next. Profitability, right? Just pump and profit, right? Nothing happens after that. So we always like to bring people up to date on the latest economic goings on. I don't know if you guys have any comment on the imaginary market that I guess just doesn't obey gravity and can just do whatever the fuck it wants.
Wasn't the entire pitch for Tesla to investors that you're getting in on the ground floor of like the first and probably only fully self-driving vehicle company? Wasn't that the whole pitch for? what set it apart from its competitors who have a very, not just similar, but increasingly like better product than what they're offering?
I do somehow remember that being key. I remember that being stated from a up on a very brutalist stage with a cracked windshield on a Cybertruck. Like a lot of messages over the course of the last 10 years or so that didn't really seem to hit.
I assume their pitch has just changed now to like, yeah, we rely entirely on government subsidies, but don't worry, I'm the guy that controls what the government subsidizes now.
If you don't let me work the cash register, how am I supposed to make any money?
Hey.
Whoa! All right, on to immigration. The world has continued to become an increasingly dangerous place for undocumented people, but now it has the added wrinkle that it's also now a more dangerous place for documented people, naturalized people, people who speak Kishwa, people who are native born, people with tattoos, people who wear Chicago Bulls gear, which honestly, like, throw them in jail. It's fine. Pretty much anyone who looks or sounds vaguely Latino. Eagle-eyed fans of our show may have seen Tomas's name pop up in conjunction with stories about one Juan Carlos Lopez-Gomez recently, a man who spent time in detention charged with illegally entering Leon County, Florida, as a, quote, unauthorized alien, despite being a native-born U.S. citizen. So, Tomas, can you just kind of walk us through like what happened with this situation that I think most people are probably somewhat aware of, but you were intimately involved with?
Yeah, I'll try to summarize it as quickly as possible. So basically, Juan Carlos Lopez-Gomez is a U.S.-born citizen from Cairo, Georgia, that was traveling into the state of Florida for work as a passenger in a vehicle with two other individuals who were undocumented. And once he traversed state line, he was stopped by the Florida Highway Patrol, which is one of these agencies that has been deputized by the governor to conduct immigration enforcement. And he was charged under Senate Bill 4C, which basically makes entry into the state without inspection by an unauthorized alien a crime if you're over the age of 18. Now, that law is currently blocked by federal court because of a lawsuit that the organization that I work for, the Florida Immigrant Coalition, is a plaintiff of. So they're not supposed to be charging people at all under this law. And they're definitely not supposed to be charging U.S. citizens like Juan Carlos under this law. So it was doubly wronged. Nevertheless, he was detained. The Florida Highway Patrol officers claimed that they ran biometrics on him. Still determined he was a non-citizen somehow, probably because he looks Hispanic and can't speak English. And they threw him in Leon County jail, where after his first hearing, he spent 24 hours in jail. After his first hearing, the county judge, when presented with his birth certificate, determined that it was indeed a real birth certificate and dropped that charge, but kept the ICE hold on him for 48 hours because she basically said she had no jurisdiction to remove the ICE hold, even though ICE is not supposed to have jurisdiction over U.S. citizens, like, period. So they completely violated this man's Fourth Amendment rights. And I was tipped off on this by reporter Jackie Janos, who broke the story. She's with the Florida Phoenix. I went to the courthouse. I basically connected the family with legal help and, was able to rally some elected officials like Rep. Escamani, Rep. Dottie Joseph, Rep. Angie Nixon, a bunch of people that we've had in this podcast, honestly, and some local elected officials in Tallahassee to contact the ICE regional office. And by 7 p.m. the next day, we were able to secure his release. If Jackie wouldn't have broken the story, if I wouldn't have been contacted, if this family didn't happen to come by some support, nobody would have known about this story, or they would have known too late. And this person would have spent even more time in detention, like an Arizona man that was detained as under immigration authorities as a citizen and spent 10 days in jail recently. And who knows, you could end up in El Salvador, you could end up in Mexico, right? Deported as a foreign national. I'll just end by saying that's why immigration enforcement is really bad. Like, these persecutory laws is not just about the undocumented. These policies, the persecutory nature of them, they expand into the broader population. And we're seeing them being used against student visa holders, against legal permanent residents, against naturalized citizens. And before you know it, you have U.S.-born citizens detained under the custody of ICE for no reason.
Yeah, and you mentioned the case of Jose Hermosillo, who was interviewed by other friend of the show, Judd Legum, who, it's a very he said situation there, but I'm sorry. I'll put it out there that I tend to believe the regular average Joe over a cop. I'm sorry. Like you guys can agree or disagree with me, but it's turning like it's looking like a lot of these things are turning into very overzealous or ICE or these deputized forces. These people who are like ICE for fun, like doing it as a side hobby, just saying things like in the case of Hermosillo, the Arizona man. Just saying that, oh, he actually walked up to us and just told us he wanted to self-deport. Okay, sure. Yeah, that's exactly what happened, I'm sure.
And to start turning over into the main topic of today, and Jason, I'm curious what you think of this. The next day after Juan Carlos's detention and release, we had a hearing about this bill that's been blocked in court where the federal judge extended the injunction. It remains blocked until April 29th. And the judge said she was astounded at the lawlessness displayed by Florida authorities in, disobeying her directive to not enforce this law. And initially, the Florida Attorney General, James Uthmeier, had directed authorities to comply with the judge's order. Today, he puts out a letter basically directing them to not comply in blatant contempt of court. The same guy, by the way, that is at the center of the DeSantis scandal around Hope, Florida, and this misuse of taxpayer funds.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, it's just part of a broader pattern of like absolute lawlessness out of the DeSantis administration over the last essentially since COVID and when he became kind of like untouchable for a time amongst Florida Republicans, right? You think, we'll obviously get into the Hope Florida stuff, but you think about all the abuses they committed when they used state resources to campaign, use taxpayer money to campaign against these citizen-led constitutional amendments last year. And then they get sued on it and they just declare themselves exempt from that law, right? Or like inventing a claim of executive privilege to avoid complying with Florida public records laws with no basis in statute or constitution for any of this stuff. There's like a history, all the stuff. Who could forget the Martha's Vineyard stunt where you're supposed to got money to remove people from this state and they went to Texas to kidnap a bunch of people, right? Like it is an
By the way, those migrants literally ended up getting a permanent status.
Right.
They got U visas, special victims visas, by the federal government because a court determined to have been human trafficked by the state of Florida.
Right. By Ron DeSantis and James Uthmeier, essentially, right? Like Uthmeier was the chief of staff through all of that. I mean, this is not, none of this is happening in isolation. There's like a clear pattern of this. And of course, they do it while screaming about law and order and suspending local elected officials who don't follow their lawless orders, right? Or who just say things they disagree with, right? I mean, it really is dystopian, but it's exactly what we're starting to see at the federal level. Everybody said, Florida was the test case for what things are going to look like. And that's what we're seeing at the federal level, but with, vastly greater powers.
Don't make America my Florida.
Right.
You talk about, you use the word dystopian, Jason, and like you read and see and hear a lot of dystopian things these days. I don't think I've seen anything more dystopian than the last couple of weeks than the article by Janos at the the Phoenix, talking about the family of Lopez-Gomez standing up with his birth certificate in open court, waving his long form birth certificate and his like Social Security, his documentation, everything, and her just this judge just saying like, I see it, it looks legit to me, but sorry,
holding it up to the fucking light,
holding it up
for the watermark,
right,
and being like, yep, I see the watermark. It's a real birth certificate, but I can't do anything about it.
This is one thing, just to point out, this is a thing they intentionally exploit, is areas where courts are actually usually very cognizant of like their limits on their power and stuff like this. So you think back to, remember when he suspended Andrew Warren because Andrew Warren said he wasn't going to prosecute like women who get abortions or doctors who provide them. They suspended him. It was completely unconstitutional. They literally suspended him over protected speech. A federal court ruled that, but then it's like, I don't really have any explicit power to reinstate the guy. So like the suspension just kind of stood, even though it was an illegal, unconstitutional suspension. This is another thing. They exploit all these places. Whereas when they trample over the law, they sort of understand courts are going to be very reluctant to go beyond what they explicitly can do, because like their whole job is actually following the law, right? So yeah, I mean, we've seen this stuff time and time again. It's disgusting.
So Jason, moving on to I think the main dish of the night, or maybe dessert.
Let me read us into it, Tomas.
Yeah, read us
So
into it, David.
so on to our main topic. Hope floats some of the worst nonprofits in the state. Let's do a quick recap of the Hope Florida scandal and the making up to this point. Although I would again urge everybody to go read Jason's tweets in the past few days.
Can I just say something before you read us into this, David? The Florida House Democrats have this hilarious graphic that is basically like an infographic with like a bunch of arrows where like it tracks. And I don't think I'm not making fun of them for doing this. It just highlights the absurdity and how complex this is, because it's like this infographic with all of the arrows of like who was involved and like which political action committee and where the money went. And it is so difficult to follow because there's so many moving pieces and so much grift. I mean, you just look at it and you're like, oh my god.
So like I used to have just a little aside. I've mentioned this before, but an old beat of mine used to involve me having a lot. I was pretty well sourced at IRS-CI, which was IRS Criminal Investigations Agency.
Wow, what a thing to just casually drop. Wow.
Well, because I would talk to a lot of those guys. A lot of the best guys are down here in Miami, and I interviewed them a lot. I had like lots of drinks with them, and they would tell me about how the complexity. When you get to the second or third tier level of the complexity of cases like this, what we're about to jump into, the vast majority of law enforcement agencies will just get to that second level and be like, this, I don't know what the fuck's going on here, and just push it away. And that works. It really does work to layer, as they call it in the world of money laundering, to layer, these scams. So as a quick recap, again, go check out Jason at Jason_Garcia for a comprehensive blow by blow. But last week we had briefly discussed the DeSantis family imbroglio, but there's been a lot of developments since then. And when we left you, there had been a lot of smoke encircling a $10 million payment made from Centene, which bills itself as the largest Medicaid managed care organization that there is, to a nonprofit called Hope Florida, with close ties to the DeSantis administration, family, and specifically the governor's wife, Casey DeSantis. The payment was concurrent with a larger $57 million penalty, part and parcel with that $57 million penalty that Centene had to pay to the state, stemming from systematic overcharging and failure to refund rebates. The state has said that the two amounts were all part of that overall legal settlement. But the questions that we had last week when we published our last episode had to do with the extent of Casey DeSantis's involvement, what precipitated the $10 million quote donation to her, to quote her, because if you see a lot of her defenders online right now, they'll be telling you that it's not actually her nonprofit, what it was used for, and exactly what the fuck Hope Florida does. Like, what do they actually do? Since then, a lot more detail has come to light, Jason. Maybe you can help bring us up to date now with where we stand with what we know vis-a-vis those questions.
Yeah, sure. That sounds great. And I got to tell you, like, listen to it. This actually, as far as like these shell games go, this one isn't actually super complicated, right? There's only like 4 steps in it, I think. So as you said, essentially in a nutshell, the DeSantis administration pressured a state contractor that had overbilled the state's Medicaid program to give a $10 million quote unquote donation to the Hope Florida Foundation, which is the charity that the governor's wife had founded. The Hope. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of quotes that can go around a lot of the words.
Just imagine like a bunch of scare quotes.
Right.
Pretty much all the proper nouns that we use in this, and adjectives that we use. Yeah. Okay.
Right. And so the governor, so $10 million gets paid instead of going into the treasury like it probably should have. Because this was, so I'll set it up a bit more. There was a $67 million legal settlement on the table. But instead of paying that $67 million into the treasury, giving it back to taxpayers, who this money belongs to, and essentially going through the process where, not that I have a lot of love for the Florida legislature, but technically they're the appropriators. So this should have gone back to them to appropriate as part of the normal process. Instead of doing that, they had Centene pay $57 million back, but make this $10 million donation to Hope Florida. Hope Florida, the second it gets the money, turns around and gives that $10 million to two dark money nonprofits. One of them controlled by the Florida Chamber of Commerce, the big business lobbying front group, right? Like that alone is like, what on earth would a charity be giving money to a front group for Publix and Disney for, right? But these two dark money nonprofits then immediately turn around and give $8.5 million to a political committee that the governor's chief of staff had set up to campaign. This one was specifically for Amendment 3, the ballot measure that would have legalized weed in the state.
This is the very ironically named Keep Florida Clean, considering that it was basically a tool for money laundering. But anyway.
Right. And from there, the money goes into RPOF, which is the Republican Party of Florida, which was advertising against both 3 and 4, which was the abortion rights amendment, and it goes into the Ron DeSantis' personal political committee, and there's all sorts of gross stuff. But essentially, this scandal is the DeSantis administration seems to have taken $10 million in public money and essentially laundered it from money meant to pay for health insurance for poor people and disabled and elderly Floridians, and laundered it into money for political campaign ads that were in campaigns that were like the governor saw as critical to his political future. I mean, it really is that simple. And one of the things we've started to learn is just how central James Uthmeier, the governor's chief of staff, is to this. He shows up on both the front and the back end of this scandal right now. And James Uthmeier, now the top law enforcement lawyer for the state of Florida at this point, because he's appointed attorney general by the governor. But what we have learned just the other day, the Tampa Bay Times reported that Uthmeier was personally involved in the early stages, at least, of this settlement with Centene, this $67 million settlement. There's a time period where the settlement is on the table for like 2 years, and it just kind of sits there before Florida finally accepts it with this added wrinkle of hey, instead of giving us $67 million, give us $57 and give Casey's charity $10 million, right? But then Uthmeier also shows up on the back end where, as I mentioned, Hope Florida gets the money and immediately turns around and gives it to these 2 dark money nonprofits. Well, who instructed those 2 dark money nonprofits to go ask Hope Florida for $5 million each? James Uthmeier, right? And he has them make these requests, get the money, and turn around and immediately start pouring more money into his political committee. And when I say his political committee, he controlled this on behalf of the governor, right? So ultimately here, we're talking about the governor. So where we're still trying to, where the big detail that needs to come to light right now is who came up with this idea of breaking the settlement into 57 plus this $10 million donation. Essentially, who came up with the idea of diverting some of this money into Hope Florida and turning it into campaign ads, right? James Uthmeier's position seems to be, initially it started, he had Alan Lawson, the former Supreme Court justice, works at a law firm that gets a ton of business from the DeSantis administration, write this op-ed saying boy, this is all hat, no cattle, right? As far as I can tell, James Uthmeier had nothing to do with this settlement, right? Setting aside, he's the chief of staff, right? The number one guy in the governor's office after the governor himself. But now a bunch of records come out well, no, he was actually involved in this settlement. So now his position is, I was not involved in the settlement later when the decision was made to give $10 million to Hope Florida, as if somehow he was like, I'm involved. You know what? I'm gonna step back here, and whatever you guys end up deciding to do with that money, don't tell me about it. It's fine, right? It's just utterly unbelievable on his face. But we're still waiting for confirmation as to who's sort of like the main architect of this. But right now, all arrows and common sense would point towards James Uthmeier.
Yeah, and Jason, I was reading today on Twitter that another nonprofit board was approached by the Florida Department of Health about supporting their campaign against Amendment 4. That's the abortion referendum that failed after the governor publicly diverted public funds to oppose it, but also maybe not so publicly.
Yeah, that's right. This is one of. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just want to say, the nonprofit board says that, after they basically politely declined to help in this anti-abortion efforts, the governor's office tried to end their contract with the state in retaliation.
Yeah. This is actually sort of a funny story. This is one of those there are no heroes in this world story, right? So the story that breaks today is that DeSantis went to the Florida Pregnancy Care Network, which is essentially a state-funded nonprofit that exists to distribute public money to a bunch of anti-abortion clinics around the state, often religious thing. It's sort of like the middleman to pass this money on. So the story that broke today is that DeSantis or someone from his administration came to them, we're going to give you $5 million. We want you to spend a bunch of money on ads warning people about the dangers of Amendment 4. And they say, we said, no, we're not going to do that. And DeSantis tried to take away our contract later. That's all accurate, except they did actually do $5 million worth of advertising timed with the thing. They made sure that their ads were more careful than the state's. Their ads essentially sought to soften Florida's reputation on abortion laws and promote care services for women. They're the sort of ads they often ran in conjunction with the state ads. You would see them in the same commercial break, and they were very complimentary. They used very similar narrators. One of the ads used the same slogan, but they did make sure, rather than explicitly attacking the amendment or anything like that, they promoted they promoted the Florida Pregnancy Care Line or Network's call line. So they were much more careful ads. There was also, we still haven't gotten to the bottom of this, but there's like, they used a really mysterious vendor for this that seems to have links to the main ad vendor that was doing all the anti-4 advertising. So it's kind of like they actually did a little bit of what DeSantis wanted, it seems like, but not quite. They were more careful than he would have liked them to be.
Yeah, but not enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Under contract.
It's really weird. Since when does appeasing a dictator now?
There's a funny little piece of your reporting that came out. Is it was a detail that my brain kind of attached to, which was, as you look at the timeline of a lot of these events, there was like this big break, and you mentioned that where like this was DeSantis's failed presidential campaign, where he was kind of, ambling around Iowa and trying to get, and you mentioned that so much business and so many decisions about, like in this case, hey, what's the best way to handle this this extortion that we're doing, but all these things kind of grinded to a stop during that year. And if you kind of think of it, just as we like look at this from the outside and think like, what the hell was going on with this apportionment of this $10 million and the decision for how much of it's going to go where, and like why it took several years. Like it feels like, it really feels like all the fingers point at DeSantis, because this seems like it was at his convenience when it made sense for him to cash in this chit of $10 million. It seemed like he had it in his back.
Chief of staff is calling people. It's his chief of staff, who he appointed as attorney general. I don't know how much, and his wife.
Yeah, using his wife's foundation,
wife's charity,
right?
And there's no 6 degrees of separation there.
Yeah,
there's 2 degrees of separation, and they're real tight. Also, I gotta talk about this. Jason, can you talk to us also just about Hope Florida itself? Because there's been some hilarious stories about we've talked about this in the podcast way before this story broke out, about what a grift Hope Florida is. We've literally yelled in this podcast, what the fuck does Hope Florida do?
Right.
And like right now, we know they don't do anything. Reported that basically everybody that they were supposed to help become financially independent they received no actual services, no help.
Right. Although
a woman was quoted saying, basically, all I got from Hope Florida was just moral support to keep going.
Yeah,
wow, thanks.
Yeah, there've been a couple of. It's really funny. It's sort of in hindsight. It's obviously someone was probably stirring the pot on this, but I got a bunch of calls earlier this year from folks asking me what I know about Hope Florida, and I remember nobody quite understands what that is. Everybody who's tried to explain it. It becomes this humana. Well, there's a foundation, I guess, but also it's within the agencies. But there's, right down to they had this hearing, and the secretary for DCF didn't know there was an executive director apparently of Hope Florida. It's just this really messy situation. But
I didn't. Nobody.
No, I had no idea. And I remember once helping a reporter I'll spend 10 minutes trying to figure out. The question was just how do they fund it, right? Which is usually. You're dealing with a government. That's at least a usually baseline level of information that's usually easy to find. And I remember spending a half hour, something poking around. It's I don't fucking know where this money is coming from.
There was also the question of all that fundraising that they did after the hurricanes, and how much of that money got dispersed, to help people with their actual insurance claims and damages in their homes. Which, we don't want to make assumptions, but there was actually a really big question of where did those funds actually go?
Right. And I believe that was through the Volunteer Florida Foundation or something, or maybe they created one for, but anyway, there's a couple of these.
But it was under Casey, remember?
Yeah, that's right. The disaster fund or whatever. That's right. And this becomes this has always been problematic because it also becomes yet another way for special interests to kind of curry favor with the DeSantis, right? Like one of the things that's come out when Hope Florida finally filed its first tax return, all the donors are just companies with business before the state. Centene was a donor. Tampa Electric, as it was petitioning for a giant rate increase, happens to be the biggest donor to the charity that's apparently so close to Casey DeSantis's heart, right? All of these things are messy. But just a point about how sort of thin the actual sort of accomplishments of Hope Florida seem to be. The Tampa Bay Times and Miami Herald had a great story trying to like, the premise of the story seemed to be like, you said it's doing all this great stuff. Just show us, just prove it. Just give us some evidence. And the state had nothing other than numbers that they don't back up, right? Like they just make all these claims as if it's fact without ever proving it. And then the Orlando Sentinel came back and wrote a story like they found one of the highlighted examples, one of the few people like that's out there is like, here's a Hope Florida success story, and found out like Hope Florida had done nothing for them. This woman, I believe she said, it was like, yeah, they're just kind of like a referral network. They kept just referring me to places that it turned out I wasn't eligible for or like couldn't help me or sort of thing.
I love that. I love that as a comms guy where you're like, okay, here's a here's like a ostensible, thread for them to pull on. Let's just hope that they don't make one phone call, and just hope
Right,
that they don't. Let's just hope they take our word for it.
Yeah, exactly. And I forget the exact detail, or who had this detail, but like a brochure promoting Hope Florida's accomplishments, like every image in it was just a stock image. Like they're hopping on like Creative Commons.
And Jason, if you could also go into this a little bit, not only could they not identify pretty much a single success story, they couldn't even deliver basic tax documents.
Yeah, they were
to a functioning nonprofit.
They were just ignoring it. And in fact, the point where I remember thinking like, shit, there's something to this story is when one of the first things that started to come out was just like that they'd essentially broken the law by not filing any of the records they were supposed to be filing, including their first tax return. And Ron DeSantis was asked about this in some avail, I assume, by one of the reporters like kicking ass on this story. And of course, he goes on to his like, you're just smearing people and stuff. Yeah, there's some paperwork. They'll get that taken care of. And like Ron DeSantis never admits something went wrong, right? Like, so immediately it was like, oh, something's going on here. Like they know they're vulnerable on something. And yeah, like, I mean, it turns out you got to file tax returns. That's like a thing we all have to do, right? Yeah. And they didn't do it.
And I just want to.
But he tried to judo flip that onto another former guest of ours, Lawrence Maurer, who like had actually physically shown up,
right?
Because you should be able to go on Guide
and by the way,
as a reporter or whatever, you should be able to find this stuff.
They broke federal law by doing that. By the way, this is in federal law that if you show up at a nonprofit in person, they are supposed to give you the 990 within 24 hours, right? If you make a request in writing, but you're not in person, they got 30 days to give it to you. Lawrence Maurer showed up at the office and they still didn't give it to him because they didn't have it. But they broke the law.
That guy wouldn't even identify himself, the person who interfaced with him.
Yeah, I bet he didn't. He understood like a crime was happening right now.
I work for an immigration nonprofit, and I think I made this point in the last episode when we briefly touched on this. Can you imagine if an immigration service provider in this state was not able to turn over basic tax documents? And not only that, we were funneling millions of dollars from our nonprofit coffers into political action committees to support lefty campaigns. I mean, we would all be in jail.
You'd be in CCOT. Yeah, they send you to CCOT. Yeah,
that's right.
Oh my God, these bureaucrats nitpicking over the paperwork.
Right.
You think you'd give us that amount of grace?
Yeah. You try and tell like James Uthmeier or Ron DeSantis, it's paperwork. We'll take care of it. Get out of here.
Okay, I fucked up a little bit. Let it go.
You caught me. Wow.
I want to talk a little bit about the fall. What's turning into the fallout, or is turning into the sort of justification, because it's a real moving target, man. You better have your night scope on to hit it, because it is all over the place, and it has gone from, as Jason and Tomas alluded to, it has gone from like, oh, it's just like some paperwork, to now, was anything illegal done? Like that's the new threshold.
Jason had a great tweet that it was like DeSantis is 3 press conferences away from saying, "Damn right, I did it."
Right. This is literally we're watching a Few Good Men play out in real life, right? Like this is our Nathan Jessup right here.
You goddamn right.
Right down to like sanctimonious about everything he's done. This is a total everything the DeSantis administration has done over the last 5 years has been an ends justify the means sort of thing. For what it's worth, the people he's put in power, like that is Richard Corcoran's model too. Like that is the politics he's practiced his entire career, right? These are the people he's surrounded with. It makes total sense. Like it worked for them until they finally had people with actual power that decided like, me, you know what? I'm going to start calling you on some of this stuff.
So I put this together really quickly because I just find it fascinating now that this is effectively a one-party state that we live in, and with not any real Democratic opposition. And it now feels like the most jeopardy that anybody in the DeSantis orbit has been in, whether it's himself, his wife, Uthmeier, and that it's happening at a time when they are like, I just want to dust off a few of the things that we know Ron DeSantis from, right? In 2016, his Senate campaign, after his Senate campaign flamed out, he moved into a condo owned by a donor to skirt residency requirements and to rerun for his congressional seat.
Whatever happened to that donor, by the way?
Oh, that donor? His
Yeah.
name was Kent Sturman. He was a bigwig Republican and a longtime DeSantis backer, confidant, supporter, and he killed himself when it came out that he was trying to extort nude photos from a young girl, a young woman, I should say, in exchange for Taylor Swift tickets. And he was 50 at the time that this happened.
Wasn't he? Didn't he even set up a fake email trying to convince her he was Taylor Swift's bodyguard and to get her to send topless photos to? Like, I mean, it was really weird,
really dirty. The origin, yes.
Yeah. Oh, you got to go read those stories if you haven't. This is
the Kent Sturman saga was like, and I think anybody that saw that random 2022 headline when it was like, oh, DeSantis backer, mysterious suicide, could have guessed that there was a lot more going on.
Would the Democrats not run
Didn't
a blanket of TV ads about this? This is bizarre.
Going on in his first gubernatorial campaign that came right after that, DeSantis urged Floridians not to, quote, monkey up the election by voting for his opponent, who happened to be black. The DeSantises also exploited their toddler in their 2018 campaign ads, having the kid build a wall like President Trump using blocks. Disgusting. After barely eking out a win in 2018, DeSantis made it his personal mission to kneecap Amendment 4, which was a ballot initiative that aimed to restore voting rights for felons. DeSantis, the governor that got 49.5% of the vote, was trying to undo a ballot measure that got 65% of the vote. Then came COVID, which was when he really had his time to shine as far as scandals go. Came into his own, pushed the false narrative that masks are ineffective in limiting the spread of COVID, went from being mostly mum on the topic of vaccines to becoming pretty much a vaccine denier and promoting vaccines.
He was pro-vaccine.
He went from being pro. And I remember
he was pushing the vaccine at first.
In early 2021, he had his buddy Christina Pushaw telling everybody in the media, "Oh no, the governor is pro-vaccine. He supports the vaccine. Just look at his record." And then if you would go look at the governor's webpage, that was at the time, I don't know if it's still the case, just a list of his like chronological press releases. Not one of them had anything to do with the vaccine. So it was kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth. He instituted during COVID a free state of Florida like package of policies and statements that served as a beacon for basically anyone who's ever been refused service at an Applebee's to move here, which they all did. He successfully enshrined an abortion ban after 6 weeks. He destroyed books and curricula about LGBTQ issues, removed books about Malcolm X, MLK Jr., oversaw a complete breakdown of the Florida property insurance market. We've talked about this a lot. These days, if you have insurance on your house, it's more like a really expensive coupon book. There were the photos of DeSantis drinking with underage girls back when he was a teacher.
Man, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Come on, there's so much shit. He tried to build golf courses just last year and pickleball courts on state parks. But like you said,
can I interrupt on something on
that
too?
Please, just jump in.
Just because remember we were talking about like James Uthmeier and how hands-on he was and stuff. So we're supposed to right now believe that this $10 million donation got negotiated without his involvement. He is involved in everything. So even that state park scandal, the Tampa Bay Times just a month or two ago had a story that showed like Uthmeier was the guy meeting with the golf course guys that wanted to build the golf course there. And like months before any of this stuff became public, it was like clear that's where this stuff was initiating. I did a piece not too long ago looking at the sugar industry is trying to build a rock mine in the Everglades agricultural area right now. And so I was trying to learn more about it. And one of the documents I got out of there showed that the sugar lobbies, you know who they were working with in the governor's office? James Uthmeier, right? This guy's got his hands in everything.
And do you think that he's going to ultimately be the way, if this scandal ends up not being like all the ones that I just enumerated, and it actually has legs because it is being brought by a member? I mean, like it's being put. It's I hate to say pushed because that makes it sound like it's not legitimate. It is a legitimate scandal, but it has backing from the Republican Party in the legislature as opposed to feckless, ineffective Dems or whatever. And do you think that Uthmeier will eventually are they kind of positioning him as a fall guy for this? Or I wonder if any of this will touch DeSantis and either of the DeSantises.
Well, one thing we know about Ron DeSantis is he cuts people loose when he needs to, right? So I could absolutely see if this somehow escalated to the point where there was genuine legal jeopardy, Ron DeSantis immediately. I mean, we've already seen him like in one of his press conferences make sure to like point out, Hope Florida, that's Casey's deal. That's like her thing. She's been really into that. I don't really have much to do with it. So honestly, I don't even know why you're asking me about it. Maybe go talk to her. So I could see him like moving. I also think the political dynamics here, it's really interesting to me that, Matt Gaetz is really sort of like fanning the flames on this on his OAN show. There's a part of me that wonders if we're like previewing a Matt Gaetz campaign for attorney general. So, in the sort of like careful what you wish for, you move from James Uthmeier as the state's top lawyer to Matt Gaetz as the state's top lawyer. That could be sort of a fallout out of here. So it does sort of have the feel of, this is where the site seems to be setting in, but also it's still fairly early. Like more could come out, and to the point we were talking about earlier. I mean, it depends how hard they really want to push, because if the chief of staff was orchestrating all this stuff, it was the governor. It is utterly implausible that he would do this without the governor's blessing. So
100%. But Jason, I do want to get into that because this does feel a bit like an administrative coup, right? Against DeSantis. It really does feel like the legislature and the Republican, party here in Florida basically giving 10 million reasons to Casey DeSantis not to run.
right.
And I get it. It's understandable. This guy is A, an asshole, B, just completely authoritarian, and C, impossible to work with, right?
Right.
So I get that they want to get rid of him, and they don't want him installing his wife as the governor, and they're tired of dealing with James Uthmeier, who's this like, a little tiny enforcer, running around trashing everything in his wake.
Tiny being the operative word there, I think.
Yeah, he's a short little guy. But, I guess my question to you is, I don't think it matters if it's like some sort of like coup attempt by the Republican Party forces in the state, because if he did it, he did it, right? Like that's like a court of law doesn't care about the intent
Right.
behind, like the political intent. If he's exposed as a criminal, you're exposed as a criminal. So that's that. But what do you think? Yeah, your I guess your opinion as a journalist as to the political motivations of this.
Yeah, I to be clear, I cannot prove this, but it seems to me the one thing that explains this more than anything is just the continuing sort of Trump DeSantis divide. Because what it is interesting that the people arguably being most sort of sullied by this are Casey DeSantis and James Uthmeier, right? And, that happens to benefit like Byron Donalds and potentially, like I said, Matt Gaetz, who are kind of like Trump world candidates, right? And, obviously there's plenty of ill will in sort of the Trump world for Ron DeSantis having run against them. And obviously there's the dynamic with, the chief of staff to the president of the United States is the person like Ron DeSantis tried to like execute after she got him elected, right? Like he tried to end Susie Wiles's career, right? So no. I suspect, again, I don't know this, but I suspect all of that is probably a big driving force. And it's also where the legislature is getting a lot of its political courage to do this, right? Is that basically, a big theme of, right, if you remember that immigration special session, like the theme of that was each side trying to like, who could debase themselves more to be on Donald Trump's side, to have him on their team, right? And so as long as Danny Perez and Ben Albert and anybody coming after these guys can be kind of like hanging on to Donald Trump's like pant leg, right, while they do this, I think that'll keep it moving. But I think that's where this is probably coming from in terms of, a willingness to dive really deep. And you mentioned this, the thing about Ron DeSantis that you hear from everyone is he's just a dick to people, right? Like he's just personally unkind or uncaring and cold to people. I have like a little experience with it, just a very little bit. When I used to work at Florida Trend, I did a long interview with him, and Florida Trend, I loved working there, but it's like it's a fairly safe space, right? It's not a magazine that's going to like bust a move on you. This was right after he was elected. This was just a straight, like I was going to talk to him for a half hour about his priorities, right? Like it was all safe space. This was like, you were getting the cover of the magazine. Everybody knew that going in. You're not going to get challenged. And in the conversation, I don't know if he couldn't do it or just wouldn't do it, but like couldn't go into depth on anything, right? Like just the vibe you came away from that. I remember I came away from that call thinking like, either there's no there to this guy, or he just like did not care at all to communicate with anybody, right? Like, and that was just like one casual, like friendly interaction with him. So I think there are lots of people that don't like him personally because of the way he has treated them and he's treated people around him for so long. And so now that they have like a way to push back without sort of like risking their own political careers right now, because again, they can sort of hide behind Donald Trump in a lot of this. I think that's a big factor in why they're willing to be so aggressive.
Yeah,
Tomas, you had a thing. I remember it was a long time ago, and it was following. It was after the pudding finger gate, where it was like him. Like the story came out about him eating pudding with his fingers on a plane or something like that. And you made a point. Maybe you've forgotten it, but you had said something along the lines of like, this man has nobody that cares about him around him. Like if that kind of story is coming out, he must like be despised by the people that surround him. Like that. Like that's so gross to like let somebody know about that. That deeply personal shit.
It's the saying goes, politics is a game of addition, not subtraction. And the governor had a lot of juice while he was a Trump, basically lackey, right? And then he swung for the for the king's head, and he missed. And just like you said, Jason, that he's willing to cut people off. So is Trump, right? Whenever they're not, think of all the people in the first administration that were immediately fired from his cabinet. I mean, it had a huge turnover. Yeah. So, I think he had like his approach to politics had a lot of juice in the short term, but in the long term, you're right, Jason. He has not built the alliances in the Capitol, in Tallahassee, in the state government, in the legislature, even in law enforcement, to basically sustain him for the long run and to offset the level of abuse that he has dished out to everyone around him. And people are they're tired of him. They're tired of his grifter wife, of the people around him, of Uthmeier, and they're cutting him loose.
I still hear from Republicans, like many times, I'll hear from Republicans that point to one example as like one that has always stuck in everybody's craw. You might remember a couple of years ago, he signed the state budget. He vetoed I don't remember. He vetoed some insane amount of like $2 billion or something like that. Because when governors,
to your point, and to your point about how badly he's treated people, while Wilton Simpson,
this is what I was going to say,
and a lot of those projects that he was vetoing were his priorities. He was standing right next to him.
He had Wilton Simpson and Chris. Right, he had Wilton Simpson and Chris Sprouse, the Senate President and House Speaker, and the two approach chairs, Kelly Stargell and Jay Trumbull. He had them standing behind them, and he was mocking them while he did this. He even made a joke to the crowd, like he made some joke and it got applause. They're probably not applauding behind me, right? Yes. And you could see like there is. I've like freeze framed that a couple of times, and you can see. I forget which one of them is, if it's Wilton Simpson or not, but you could see them just like plastic smile on their face, but staring daggers into the back of his head. It was just like he humiliated these people for no reason, right? For no reason whatsoever, other than like it felt good. It scratched some sort of like small man itch he's got.
Yep.
The only other piece of this that I wanted to talk about is I'm really fascinated whenever there's scandal discussions these days around DeSantis. I'm fascinated by the online, specifically the Twitter X reactions, because what I always notice is that this, like, I will contend that it is a bot network that like Christina Pushaw like sourced out of Georgia, the country, not that she used to work at.
Yeah. Georgia, the country, not
Gerald.
What just happened?
Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, that's the bot network.
That's the bot network coming for us. They're duplicating Gerald's. They're sending them after us.
Don't edit that out. Keep that in.
Yeah. So, but in researching the story, I saw the extent that this bot network, it's clearly a bot network. I'm sorry, guys. It's like low quality posts, cut and paste, like recently created accounts. Like it's all, and they're,
I love David, low quality
posts, baby. That's gonna put that on my tombstone when I die. That's my epitaph. Low quality. He made low quality posts. And and then the other thing too that probably not everybody can see, because again, as my co-hosts like to make fun of me, I'm like way too online. Like I am a community notes person. Like I don't really engage with it that much, but I have community notes, whatever access. So I can see proposed community notes. And Jason, reporters like you and a lot of people who are talking about this story, you guys have a lot of community notes that are proposed that haven't been published. Yes. Yeah. And all of them kind of say the same thing, where they're more or less, they'll be like you're a good reporter, and most of the people covering this, they work for legitimate outlets, and they're like, they're solid reporters. They're not saying things that aren't true. But the community note will say, contrary to this post, what Governor DeSantis has done is not illegal. And it's like, well, nobody's saying it's
debunked.
Debunked, right? Exactly. And so, what the community of community posts is that you're supposed to go in and say, like, no, I don't agree with this or whatever, and then it wins out. But I was just fascinated.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David.
Wow, I had no idea you were such a hero.
I'm a huge hero. Yeah, you're welcome, everybody.
Wow.
Nothing the line in the community note.
No, but I shouldn't say it. But like, a lot of times I sabotage the community notes just with my own partisanship. I'll just lie. I'm not above it. It's x.com. What do you think? This is the fucking like judicial review? This is bullshit. I don't care. But I just think that that's fascinating. I'm sure that you've seen it, because you will have a lot of these people, not the community notes piece of it, but like, you'll have a lot of people coming in, and I mean, there's still like an active Team DeSantis like social media footprint out there. I think it's so weird. And they're just the lamest fucking people. They're like way lamer than MAGA people. And it's hilarious.
Yeah, it's kind of just...
I have no idea how that world works or anything like that, but it's always interesting to me that like how like he seems to have such passionate like supporters on spaces like that, but like in places of like where people are actually in public, like the legislature, he's got like I think in one of the bills he hated, he got 2 votes in the House. The DeSantis caucus was 2, right?
Jesus.
Like, right. And these are people, setting aside the fact that he's been a prick to so many of them, a lot of them, he did sort of make their careers while he was this popular. Like if he weighs in a primary for a couple of years, that was all you needed in a Florida race, and even then these people can sort of see like, no thanks. Right.
Well,
so there does seem to be a big disconnect between the level of his support online and the level of his support in the real world.
I think the free state of Florida thing, like all of that post-COVID bump, like that kind of was a tide that lifted a lot of conservative ships, where it was like, we've got this governor, he's great, he's making it safe to be here. Our president, our beautiful, wonderful president is gone. He got cheated out of his reelection, but we down here in Florida, we're still living the MAGA life. Come on down here. And I think a lot of the names that you've mentioned during the course of both of you have mentioned during the course of this hour that we've gone, they benefited from DeSantis being that guy, that bucking the trend, free state. Maybe he needs another pandemic and make it all go away. He can.
What a price to pay. The one thing I will say, like in that time, as it's easy to look back in hindsight. And now that like basically from the moment he ran for president, everything he's touched seems to turn to shit politically. But like, for a time before that, it looked like everything he touched turned to gold. But I do sort of wonder how much we kind of bought into some of that, because like you think back to that 2022 election when he won by what, like 16 points or something like that. And it was like, it blew people's mind. Mike DeWine in Ohio won by 16 points too. But like, there was not like some like national, like, oh my God, Mike DeWine's a rock star sort of thing. And so I do, and maybe this even like ties into this, like sort of like the online marketing hoard he has. Like, it does seem like a big chunk of Ron DeSantis's like, success was just like successful marketing for a long time. And then it all fell apart once he came up against like the best marketer the Republican Party has ever seen in Donald Trump, right?
I hate being a hater, but I got to do it. I mean, juxtaposed to the Florida Democrats, I mean, how can you not look?
That's
hey,
true.
at least we didn't elect that the bisexual guy who got free Hamilton tickets and likes to party. Like, at least he's not our governor now.
I like that stuff. I thought that was the coolest part about him. But
I know. That's what I'm saying. When I saw those photos, I was like, damn, this guy knows how to get down. Good for you. Mayor Gillum. That brings us to the top of the hour, and I want to thank Jason again for joining us. Jason, give another plug really quickly. Like, what else can people look to expect on Seeking Rents in the coming weeks as we close out? I guess we're closing out the legislative session here pretty soon, right?
Well, maybe we'll see. Theoretically, we'll have obviously a lot of session coverage. So we do a lot of podcasts during session, and we'll be working on stories trying to like. There's a few stories in the works trying to like expose some particularly bad tax breaks and bills that we haven't got to yet. And then obviously once session ends, we'll be diving into a lot of stuff that happened. One of the things we do every year is we pull a bunch of records after session, and you learn a ton of stuff after the fact. It's always important to kind of look back. And then of course this Hope Florida thing is not going away. That's going to keep growing. And My hope is that I have been screaming for months about like I said earlier, the abuses that were committed against Amendment 3 and Amendment 4 by the DeSantis administration, and like just dying for someone in power to like make him explain how he used the opioid settlement money for, because from what we can tell, he abused some of that money for these ads. Like make him explain how he forced an attorney at the Department of Health to threaten to criminally prosecute TV stations that aired ads he didn't like, right? Like there's all sorts of stuff that needs to be investigated. And so I do sort of wonder if some of the rabbit holes the House is going down is going to end up like exploding into more scandals. Just like we mentioned the Florida Pregnancy Care Network, that's just breaking tonight. Them sort of standing up and saying like he came to us pressuring us. So we'll be writing a lot more about that. We'll be helping other folks that are trying to dig into it. So I think look for a lot more of that on Seeking Rents and everywhere and other places.
Check it out, Jason, everybody.
You do a great job, not just covering like the big sort of controversial items that make headlines, but also just getting down to the nitty gritty of the tax breaks and the grifty budget line items and the corporate grift that's a little bit harder to parse through.
Right.
You do a great job at that.
I just want to share one of Jason's rules for our listeners too. If you follow a lot of legislation, he has a rule, and you mentioned that on your more recent podcast, where if the more broad the title for legislation becomes, the worse it's going to be for Florida. Like the bigger and broader the titles get, you can just count on it, fucking with your life.
Right. These are like horrible pirate ships that are just sort of sailing through the legislature waiting for like an attack to be launched of some kind, right? So, and yeah, like the central thesis of Seeking Rents is that like amidst everything else, we're being pillaged by people all around us, and we should it'd be nice to put a stop to that.
Jason, we are fellow travelers because that is one of the tenets of our podcast too.
Right.
We are stripping the country out of the copper wire.
Exactly.